in the minutes document,
Okay.
which is probably good enough.
Yeah.
So I can take the action to add that in.
Great. That would be awesome. Thank you, Michael. We are live, so let's kick this puppy off. Thanks, everyone, for joining this week's OpenJS Foundation Cross-Project Council meeting. Today is August 27th. It's, what is it, 1600 UTC? I never remember exactly. Before we get things rolling, do we have any announcements?
I do. So just wanted to share for the community that there is a standards working group meeting today at 1800 UTC. So that's 2 p.m. Eastern. And you can see the /standards repo for the meeting issue there. And then also wanted to share that there is a recap on issue number 307 in the cross-project council repo for the working group meeting that we had yesterday. So if you weren't able to make it, you can see links to the recording and notes that we captured from that session.
And that last one is for infrastructure, right?
That's right, yep.
Great, thank you. Anything else? No? Great, then let's dive into the agenda for today's meeting. I wasn't here last week, so I'm still kind of getting caught up in, so please feel free to jump in, chime in if I'm missing anything or I'm lacking anything. But Jory helpfully broke out the agenda. I assume it still kind of corresponds with well, regardless, working from the Google Doc, our first chunk of work is old business, and we have what looks like 2 issues here, 305, sorry, a pull request 305 and a related issue of 289. Opening this up.
Yeah,
so
this one I think just needs
go ahead, Michael.
This one, was discussed at the board, although it still needs to the 14 days, or I guess approval by the consensus if we have a quorum. But once that 14 days or the approval happens, then we can send it back to the board. We did agree to do those through email, so we should be able to turn around without having to wait for the next meeting. And then otherwise, that one looks like it's ready to land since it's just substituting some terminology.
Okay. Was there a conversation last week, and sorry that I missed it, around email approvals from the board?
No, it was just that was in the board meeting itself. Like, these kind of things need to be approved, and it was just agreed we could do that. Like in the standard governance, votes can take place through email. So we, as opposed to saying, hey, we'll wait till the next meeting to approve this one after it's approved, we agreed we could do that through email among the board members.
Yeah, which is great. But has that happened yet? Have we been able to get a email approval yet, or have we had to wait until?
No, this one is waiting for it to actually pass, like to be approved by the CPC. And based on our governance, that takes 14 days. Or I think I'd have to go back and look, possibly a quorum of the voting members in a meeting.
Quorum of voting members in a meeting by the governance would also be sufficient.
So we need one of those.
We had another similar, sorry to interrupt you, Michael, another similar issue that was minor, and we were trying to get board approval via email, and I'm not sure that ever.
That one was approved in the meeting.
And
in the meeting, okay.
And Miles already commented on that one.
I think I already landed it.
Yep, it is landed.
Yep.
Great. So I'm only highlighting the challenge that while email board approval is an option, I'm not sure how well it has worked in the past. So, but that's just, I guess, a side note.
Joe, for what it's worth, until we merged the foundations, the Node.js Foundation did not allow for email approval.
Yeah.
That's why it was a challenge.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. All right. Well, hopefully, you know, especially for small things, we can, you know, do that in a more expedited manner. But we'll work through
And
it.
you can lean on Michael and I to then lean on the board to keep those emails active.
Great.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent.
One thing I think is worth bringing up right now, though, and might be worth digging into more is, you know, we have right now, I think 1, 2, 3, only 4 CPC voting members on the call, and we've pretty consistently not had quorum. So, you know, this is something that we've brought up in the past, and I think we've been running this meeting in this time slot long enough. We still have not consistently had quorum in these calls. So that is something that we would dig into.
Yeah, I was just actually thinking that, Miles, like, we may want to start looking at another time slot, especially for the voting members, to see if something's better.
Or alternatively, I know this is a little harsh, but we have a lot of voting members who have not been active in the repo or on the calls. And I think that is also something that we need to examine.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'll take that as an action item to examine this further, and perhaps reach out to folks to see, you know, what the hurdles may be, or what people's thoughts are around this in terms of specifically voting members. I'll make a quick note of that. Okay, great. Okay, so do we have anything else on this particular issue and pull request? Seems like we can move on.
I guess one thing to maybe add that we don't have in the governance is perhaps a quorum of voting members having approved the PR should be sufficient as well.
Yeah, I'm still. Yeah, I guess we could do that. Let's take it offline. I'm like that still comes back to like trying to get consensus versus having a vote, right? But let's take it off and discuss that in a PR or issue.
Yeah.
Like in this case, I don't see that there's any major rush, right? Like.
Agreed. But this comes up, so I think we should look at it.
Yeah, I'm not saying the other issues that Miles brought up aren't an issue. It's just there's a trade-off between making sure people have time to be aware of something and participate in consensus versus just saying half is enough, right, to land something.
But if we're already allowing quorum in a meeting, what's the difference? I guess is what I'm trying to
again, let's maybe not go through the
offline.
Yeah, exactly. I would say I'd rather remove that than not extend it. So anyway.
Yeah. All right. Well, something to think about and perhaps discuss further. Thank you. So moving on, the next section here is a pull request and issue, pull request number 297. And this is to, doc updates to add governance for adding regular members. Michael, you opened this PR. Do you want to?
Yep. Basically, there was a comment that we needed to make it a little bit more explicit on what the requirements for approving PRs to self-nominate were, and any other actions like adding to mailing lists and sending a notification to the project that they're coming from. So this adds that to the governance. So far, we have 2 approvals, and I don't think any outstanding issues. So, if it would be good to have more CPC member approvals or comments, and otherwise, it's, I think, 3 more days, then it'll hit the 14-day review period.
Yeah, looks good to me. Great. All right, cool. So anything else on this pull request or this issue, or shall we move on?
I guess we can remove the agenda tag from it.
Would make sense to me.
Sure.
Okay. I've
Sounds
gone
good.
ahead and done that.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone who have been helping triage and add labels, before the meeting throughout the week. Appreciate it. So next item here is duplicate onboarding checklist. There's an issue and a pull request. I'm opening up a pull request here, which is remove duplicate checklist. There's been some conversation with Miles and Toby and I guess Chris and a number of other folks. Miles, since you opened this, do you want to get us up to speed?
Yeah, sure. The first thing that I ended up doing was just removing it altogether from the template. I got feedback, and we talked about it in the last meeting, that perhaps that wasn't really sufficient. So what I ended up doing was adding the copy back by copy pasting it, but I ended up moving the checklist. The checklist was currently in the new project application. I moved it from the new project application to the project progression markdown. So it actually is in there. And so the line that says project goes through process of adhering to onboarding checklist now is a link that links to, like a subheader that has the checklist right in line there, rather than being inside of the application. And then inside of the template, I added a comment stating where it was copied from and the date that it was copied. So we at least have some sort of like documentation right in line so we can know when it gets out of date. And it's actually kind of, interesting. If you look at it, it's actually already out of date. So I think we can already see the problems with having two copies. I like this change that I made of moving it to the project progression, obviously, because I made it. And I was just curious if people had any concerns about the current state of it. Also, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it looks like Aguirre needs a promotion.
Thank you.
For one of the co-hosts.
Got it.
No one has signed off on this yet, though, so I would appreciate some, +1s, or alternatively, if there's something that people are blocking on, if they could, state the changes they'd like to see.
I just in a quick glance, I haven't looked through it in depth yet, Miles, but is there a reason why the link to the code of conduct was removed from the first item in the checklist? I guess that's on the template side.
Yeah, so this was, and we can update that if we want, but and this is something I wanted to point out. All the changes that you can see in the template happened because I copy pasted the one that was actually in the application.
Got it.
And that was the inconsistency. So we can go through and figure out which one of these we want to be canonical. Jory's comment in the PR was that she would say, since the one that was in the new project application is the one that went through our process, that should be the canonical one. But things like re-adding that link, I can easily update that.
Yeah, I would agree with Jory, and I would say it's maybe not worth, I didn't realize that was the difference. So I would say I'd rather get through this and then we can go back and fix things like that. So either way, I mean, if you want to go fix them, that's cool, but that's not like a big deal. I'd rather get this all straightened out, so we have the one source of truth.
Agreed.
One more question, not to object to what's there, but just to clarify, we didn't want to just to actually use the template as the source of truth and have a link in the other location. I just, because it's already out of date, I can just see it's going to be an ongoing thing to to keep copies of something up to date, right?
Projects that are thinking of applying, in my personal opinion, will look at the project progression document first. And people in general, I think, will be driven to that. The template will really only be seen when someone's opening an issue, and it will include in there in a comment when that checklist was last updated. So
but if there's a section that actually says, like, so they go to the project progression, because I agree with you on that, but there's a section that says, here's the checklist template, go here to look to see the full content.
I still think like it's in a dot folder. It's not like I see personally, and this may just be, you know, my own pig-headedness, and also Toby needs to be promoted. But I don't think that we should be having anything that's canonical in templates and in dot files. To me, those seem like metadata, or they seem like additional data. We should have these at the root of the directory and as easy to find as possible. Yes, we could remove it and just point towards the template. That seems odd to me.
I agree it's less than ideal, just it's the double maintenance. So as long as everybody else is like, hey, the better trade-off is having 2 copies, I'm fine. I just wanted to bring it up again because I know it's going to be an issue.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a good point, Miles. I'm okay with doubling it as long as there's kind of a link and we try to, you know, keep them in sync.
Yeah,
We can always add a comment into the project progression doc saying, when changing this checklist, please update the template.
Yeah, good idea.
All right, let me do that really quickly.
All right. Great. I encourage everyone to take a look at that once Miles has updated it, and we can move that puppy forward. Assuming we don't have anything else to discuss on this issue, I'll move along. The next issue is pull request 279. Last week's action item was Jory was to update the PR and send to legal for review. Jory or Brian, does anybody have an update on that review?
Yeah, so I did send that off to Mike and Brian and Andy, and we are awaiting. I poked that thread yesterday, and
Yep.
waiting.
Yep, and I had a look at it. It looks good. I'll get that off to legal, just to put the third set of eyes on it. In general, we are at the point where the documents are under review. Various board members have feedback on them, so we're addressing that. And then the other documents, everything else, will be going off to the legal committee for the foundation. And then hopefully soon, I mean, ideally the next board meeting, we'll be able to vote on them.
Great. All right, so we will move on and check in on that in the future. Thanks. The next item here is the Collab Summit at Node.js Interactive and the new repo. There are a couple of issues here. One is 242, one is 287. Last week's action item was to wait a few days, Manil to let us know when it's okay to initiate repo transfer. Is Manil on the line? I didn't think I saw him come in. Nope. Does anybody have any thing they want to add to this? Any context?
Christian might have, if Christian Broman is here. Do you know? Yep.
I pinged Manil yesterday, didn't get a response yet. I think he's able to transfer the repo, and but I don't have any further updates.
Okay, so I think this was just sort of like a courtesy, you know, waiting just to make sure there wasn't any lingering comments. So just I think just somebody from the Node org needs to be, you know, ready to click the fire button and transfer it over, and then that issue can be closed.
I see that Rich Trott is engaged. in the issue 287 on the CPC. So that's good. I know in terms of the code and learn, we wanted to make sure that a couple of key folks were aware and involved. So, so that's good.
Yeah, I think there are two issues here. One is moving the repo, and the other one is the proposal as to how we want to change the code and learn event. And the later one is still a pending issue.
Okay.
Something that's worth bringing up as well, if you take a look at issue 190 that I opened, was just general questions about discoverability of the summit. I've had a couple people, including speakers from the event, when I mentioned the summit, had no idea that it was going on. And some people who, when they found out about the summit, it significantly changed their interest in attending the conference, since it added a lot more value to the trip. So I've opened an issue about improving the discoverability of the summit as well. I know that in the past, we had made the summit less discoverable because people booked travel and came and then didn't find it super useful because it was super node specific. It's possible now with the broader coverage of projects within the foundation that it may be more useful to general attendees. But I do think that this is something for us to think about like how broadly we want to promote it, and you know, like kind of how many people we're targeting in attendance.
You said you opened an issue for this, Miles?
I just pasted it in the comments.
Okay. I see the summit in the summary repo. That makes sense. Okay. Great.
So Miles, the people that you said were now more interested in coming to the conference, were they collaborators or non-collaborators?
They were non-collaborators, or like people from Google. In general, I found, like, especially for travel that people need to do like across the country, if it's just for 1-2 day event, it's much harder for them to justify than if there's kind of multiple things that are back to back. And these are individuals who are interested in getting more involved. I think their presence at the summit would be useful and helpful. But you know, they had no idea about the summit.
Yeah, because I think, you know, it's that's where I think you're right. We need to figure out the strategy on that front for non-collaborators, right? Like we've gone back and forth between we should have it, you know, be the collaborators getting together, talking to one year we had like an intro session after the code and learn. And I think we made it less discoverable, as you mentioned, after a bunch of people showed up, and then it was like, well, it's actually for collaborators, not just everybody, right? So, but it's definitely like, you know, if that's something that would draw more people to the conference, then maybe we need like the first half day to be intro to getting involved, right? And then it's an on-ramp to actually being able to participate in the other discussions.
Great. Yeah, I think that this, we absolutely should do all we can to boost this. I just pinged the PR marketing Slack channel in OpenJS Foundation, see how they can help us. But yeah, the more we can get the word out, the better, for sure.
Hey everybody, this is Rachel from the foundation, and I'm happy to tweet this out and push this out as aggressively as this group wants. I'm hearing that, you know, in past it was we kind of wanted it to be a little bit of a more intimate setting, but I'm happy to do all of those things. So I'm on it.
I think it's kind of like the summit team should give some direction on what they're thinking on that front. Because if it's going to be like we're targeting a greater audience, then we need to plan the summit to facilitate that, right?
I can bring this point to the summit meetings.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah, I like, for me, I think that we've, as Michael mentioned, we've jumped back and forth between how we wanted to set this up, especially to make it like valuable to people and not kind of set people up for failure. But I think with the expansion of all the different projects, I think we can rethink how we're promoting it.
We just want to make sure that whatever expectations we set, we're set up for succeeding to meet those too.
But it was like, even if you went to the landing page, like I mentioned the summit to someone who wanted to come and they couldn't even find any information on it. So like, even if we put clear text, like it's just making it discoverable so people are aware of its existence.
Yeah, maybe even some sort of a blog post or something might be helpful as well. Not only to get the word out there to interested parties, but also to kind of elaborate more on what to expect.
Yeah, that could be a really great way of ironing out the more subtle points and then linking to that blog post maybe from the landing page of the conference. Yeah.
All right. Great. Well, yeah, let's work on that offline and asynchronously and see where we get there. Great. So let's see. Anything else that we want to talk about regarding the Collab Summit or the Code and Learn? If not, we will wait a little further for Manil to transfer the repo and keep things moving forward. Great. So moving on to our category of new business. The next item on the agenda is pull request 309. This is incubating projects must have a champion. Miles, you opened up this PR. We've got some comments here. Does Miles or anyone want to chime in?
So this doesn't add too much from a copy perspective. The main substance of the change is during the application phase. So this is during the silent period. It specifies that a CPC champion is identified for the project, and that it's expected that incubating projects will make an active effort to work through the onboarding process in a reasonable time frame. They'll be offered foundation support to help do so. All incubating projects will have a CPC champion. There's kind of a couple different reasons that I think that this is important. First, I think that it's really hard when we're reviewing projects, especially when there's projects that are not super obvious to us, that there are ones that we want to accept into the foundation. And having frameworks by which we can identify projects that are not a fit, I think would be really helpful. So one of the reasons why I proposed this idea of identifying champions was that, to me, if a project comes in and we're discussing it in the silent period and none of the CPC reps or foundation staff are kind of interested in carving out time to work on the success of that project, I think that that's a signal that the project may not be a fit. And it's also an early signal of kind of future friction that would happen during the process. Because if even just during the silent period, we can't get someone to raise their hand and say, hey, I will work with them to help make sure they're successful. How are they going to be successful going through all of the different steps of things that need to happen for them to get onboarded? So to me, this seemed like, a clear way to have a signal and also a clear way, for something that we can express to projects as part of the reason for saying no, if it's something that we decide, to not move forward with.
Is it the responsibility of the CPC itself to identify the champion or the project?
I would imagine that during the silent period, as part of our private discussion, someone would be expected to volunteer to be that champion.
What is the time frame that the CPC champion is assigned to that project?
We don't. So there's a time period that we want to aim for the silent period, which is 2 weeks, but we don't really have any explicit time frame or deadlines for projects getting onboarded. This is something that we could look into implementing. I also, for what it's worth, don't think that being the champion is an exorbitant amount of work. It's more just kind of being the point person to, I would say it's more the point person to help identify the right people to connect them to than being expected to kind of do a ton of the labor themselves.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, and I think if there are no volunteers, then it's up to the CPC to figure out if that's okay, or we need to try and find a champion, right? Like, because there were some concerns that said, hey, there might be a really great fit, but there's just no champion who volunteers. If we as a CPC recognize that, we should then have the responsibility to figure out what to do.
So I think it's important not to say that the champion has to be somebody in, on the CPC, for example. And that's because, like, I see a lot of this, this type of thing that Miles is describing as, support, project/customer support. And that's a lot of what myself and Brian do for projects in the foundation. And, I think that's something that that we could continue to do as part of our remit and in our roles. So putting more obligation on projects and CPC members who are already really busy, I'm afraid that might, and by eliminating CPC members, I'm afraid that might cause, well, I can't really volunteer for this because I don't have time and I don't know what this means. So
I guess, Jory, the flip side of that, and I guess maybe this is something that we should discuss at a higher level, is like, how many projects do we want to be onboarding? How big of a foundation do we want to be having? If we're planning on onboarding, hundreds of projects, then this might be a huge problem. If we're expecting to onboard less than maybe 10 projects in the next 2 years, I'm less concerned about it being a problem. And I know that it's harsh, but I do think that it can be the kind of forcing function that can cause us to make hard decisions.
I'd also add that I don't think having a champion assigned means that, as Miles mentioned, it doesn't mean they have to do all the work. Hopefully we would still have the support of yourself and Brian to get going, but they would be the person that is like on the CPC, that if there's something that needs CPC input, push, move, whatever, would be the person looked to.
I guess another question is, do you envision the champion as being the person who makes sure that the project succeeds? Or is the champion the person who makes it their business to understand how the project could fit and could answer more strategic questions about getting the project in? Those are two different things. Which do you envision here?
That's a good question. I think if we are to have a CPC champion aspect to this progression, that perhaps expectations of a champion should be defined as well, so that that's clear.
If I may, Toby speaking here, if I may add a couple of things about how this works in the Apache Foundation. They have a distinction between champions and mentors. And if I remember correctly, champions are the folks that help decide whether a project is a good fit or not and bring it into the foundation. And then mentors are the folks that help a project through the whole incubation phase. And so they're different roles. And for scale, I think the Apache Foundation has a pool of 300 people that can be either. It's also a bigger foundation, I agree, but it's not onboarding that many more projects, I believe, that 10 or 20 a year.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder too if champion needs to be defined as CPC, or if it could be a foundation champion, perhaps what Jory was alluding to, someone within the foundation, staff member, CPC person.
I personally feel like both roles would be useful, and I can see a CPC champion during the sort of like a silent period, being sort of the on-point person to lead this, and then maybe shifting to folks like Jory O'Brien from the foundation, having more of a mentorship role during the incubation phase and really helping out on all of the stuff that needs to happen during onboarding.
Yeah, and this is kind of what was behind my question. So if it were somebody who's helping the project navigate the logistics of joining, something like Jory or I would probably do, then the goal there is to make sure that the project doesn't fail because of logistical reasons. If the goal is to make sure that the project is a good fit, then the champion, if that is their role, they may come back with, yeah, it's a good project, but it's not a good fit. And so it doesn't succeed in becoming a foundation project. So I think maybe understanding a little better about what the scope of this person, what the expectations would be in terms of outcomes would probably help scope this as well, because both of those have different time requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I think I was reading it as the fit side.
Mm-hmm.
Like the logistics, I think, we definitely want to avoid putting a lot of reliance for logistics success on maybe the volunteers, but the fit part is, I think, where I read it was like, if we can't get somebody who's interested enough to help on the fit and make the case for the fit, that's an indicator on its own, right?
Yeah, agreed.
That's quite different than somebody not having time to help go through the logistics, even though they believe it's a really good fit, right?
Yeah, totally.
So do we want to define this a little bit more in this project progression document and then move forward on it?
Yeah, a few more sentences that explain the scope of the champion would probably be, like, it may be that the champion's role is finished once they're accepted after the silent period. I don't know if it's, or maybe it, goes for until they're the champion until they're accepted as an incubation project, one of the two, but then that could be a defined endpoint.
When I had drafted it, the intention was that the champion was supporting the project up until the point that they were officially accepted into the foundation and acted as the project's point person for general questions. But it seems like if we tease out champion versus mentor, may have to rethink that a bit. Would anyone else like to volunteer to take on writing copy to kind of like tease these two roles apart, or would you like me to take a crack at it?
I'm happy to collaborate with you on that, because it seems like a very relevant to what I'm doing.
I'm happy to help you.
Great. So then maybe the three of us can find some time next week to sit down and try to bash this out.
Cool.
Great. All right. Well, that's a good discussion. We'll talk about it more next week, perhaps. Unless we want to discuss this any further, I'll move on to the next bit of new business. That would be pull request 294. This is rename acceptance criteria to graduation criteria. I'm opening it up right now. Toby opened this PR. This is also in project progression. This seems pretty straightforward. We've got a number of approvals already. Do we have any objections, or does this look like it's good to merge?
So this is a generic question, not specific to this PR, but the project progression, does that qualify as governance?
I was thinking about that. I would actually tend to say yes, other than miscellaneous stuff. So
yeah. And I don't want to be super pedantic about it, but it seems like something that we should probably iron out specifically within our governance itself. around how long it takes and what files, or maybe a better definition about the governance. But our project progression is arguably part of the governance, so it should theoretically fall under the governance rules, especially since this does change the process as it's documented. So I've signed off on it. I think it's ready to land, but I think by our governance right now, this should wait 3 more days before landing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. Should we clarify what falls under governance in our governance doc? Or do we think we can just do that ad hoc as we continue?
I think that we can avoid being super in the weeds about like listing all the things that are governance. We don't need to like, you know, make a blessed list, but I do think perhaps we could clarify the language a little bit, or maybe I just need to review it to just make it clear that it's not specifically just the governance.markdown file, and it's anything that affects the governance of the foundation itself.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Because arguably, the issue that the PR that I opened about the champion would also then in turn be governance, and a handful of other things that we're working on could fall under that as well.
Yeah, I don't, it's worth double checking, but I don't think the wording in the governance doc that has like the landing criteria would say governance.md or anything like that. It would just say governance.
Yeah.
Then also like the language that I added specifically about fast tracking, that should also allow us to like fast track errata fixes, editorial changes, doc fixes, things that are not specific to the substance of the governance. So that should allow us to kind of speed up non-substantive changes.
Yep.
I see, and that's pull request 302 you're referencing here, Miles.
Yes.
Okay, great. Excellent. Just making a quick note for myself. Great. All right. So we'll leave that open and any other governance updates open for the required 14 days, and then merge it in with approvals. Excellent. So that concludes our predefined list of agenda items.
The one thing I think we should probably just do is the board update.
Yeah, but thank you.
So I don't know, Chris, if you want to do that, or you want me to cover that?
I mean, I didn't prepare anything, so feel free to jump in, because I would be
okay.
I'd be hesitant to just go off the top of my head and then
Sure.
talk about things I shouldn't.
Yep. No, okay. So there's just a couple things. So, you know, the board meeting was held last week. We did approve one of the governance changes that was already landed by Miles. We already talked about the other one, which is, you know, in progress, but just waiting on the CPC. The one thing that was mentioned, and it was mentioned in the public section as well, that I just want to make sure people are aware of, is on the front of looking for venues for next year for Node+JS Interactive. They are, you know, the board and the search committee is considering a different time frame for the conference. So I think it was more like, you know, late spring, early summer time frame is some of the time that's being looked at. So just wanted to make sure that was on people's radar. And
during the call, we'd actually extended that out to include potentially October. So skipping, definitely moving it back from December, but I believe the time range would be June, July, September, possibly October. Skipping August because that's not a great month for conferences.
I think
Great, good
those
to
were
know.
that was the kind of thing that stood out as something people might not be aware of, and
That's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. And it's just, you know,
Okay,
note
do you know
to-
the location?
also in terms of locations, it's a bit dependent on the date. I think it was mentioned in the public section, you know, still looking at some of the Canadian locations. But you know, some of the challenge with the date is that things get booked up a couple years ahead. So there was no availability in some of the candidate sites. So
Okay.
I think that's just to say no good information on where it would be at this point.
Yeah, no, perfect. But still Canada or also US? I keep no clue or no clue.
I think there was still, like, some of the candidates, a number of them were still in Canada. I think there was one or two still in the US as well, but Canada was definitely higher. Was like there were several candidates from Canada.
Okay.
Go Ottawa.
I think we were also looking at airport, you know, how easy it is to get to places, stuff like that.
Perfect.
Chris, anything else?
somebody-
That's the only thing I thought was worth highlighting.
No, yeah, I think that's good. I actually forgot about the event discussion, so I'm glad you brought that up.
And just as a reminder too, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the board meeting is in the OpenJS calendar, and the public part is streamed and recorded. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. So yeah, you can go and watch the recording for sure.
Excellent.
I guess actually it would be even good if we, here, while we're doing this, I might be able to find the link to add it in there. The other thing is we should just maybe take a quick look at the board that we have the cross project council, the board items that have been brought to the board. I think we've covered all of them so far. You know, really all we have in the non-done section so far is that, you know, the substitute maintainers governing body, which we talked about. We did want some feedback on one of the applications. I think Chris has that feedback for the group, which we won't talk about here because silent period.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is adding the draft charter template, which we've already had an input. So if that's what we have on the list of things that, you know, Chris and I are tracking to manage with the board. So if there's anything that's not on there, please let us know and add it in.
Okay, and we're referring to the project board number 5.
Yes.
Great. Cool. Thank you, Michael. How does Ottawa look as a possible destination?
It's a great destination. There might be some concern over, like, can you get direct flights was the only concern.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So we only have 6 minutes left, and we can either look at the post-bootstrap housekeeping, or there were 2 issues shared in the doc, issue 295 and 296.
That's anonymous. There is me. I was looking through the issues this morning and wanted to add the agenda tag to those 2 issues if we had time to discuss them. I'm not sure if we do, but I think they ought to be brought forward.
Yeah, I'm glad you highlighted these. Issue 295 and 296, specifically 296 is specify the scope of CPC votes during application and incubation. I'd like to ask everyone to, you know, take a look at these 2 issues and chime in. All right, well, if we only have 5 minutes left, do we want to just touch on the project board for post-bootstrap housekeeping, see what's going on here? If there are no objections, I'll dive in here and try to see what we can get done real quickly. One of them is improved governance for regular members. Is this what we were talking about earlier? Is this?
Yep.
Okay. So that one we can skip over. And then the other one that's in progress is document define initial process for handling reports. I know we have a pull request open on this, right? But I don't think Manil is here today. I'm trying to open it up here. Is there, what, does anyone know what's preventing us from merging this pull request in? I think this is just to land as stage one. And maybe Miles, you have some nits, but is there anything more?
Can you repeat which proposal this was for?
This is pull request number 271. This is add process for handling reports. Something Manil was championing to get into the code of conduct proposal.
Yep. So I think that where we left it last, the biggest thing that I wanted to see before this could land stage one, I don't know if this has been updated yet. I'm just checking really quickly. It doesn't look like it has been. Was it did not follow the proposal process application template that we have. So it just had everything in one file rather than having a README. So the big thing for me for this to land stage one, because all the documents are supposed to be in order, was just breaking out the bits from the current proposal that should be in the README and making the README.
Yeah, I think he also had the action though in that it wasn't consistent with the existing wording on like the code of conduct panel and so forth. So he had an action to sort of to review that and make them consistent before it was going to move to the next step.
I would argue though that could be a stage two concern, because between stage one and stage two is when we kind of tweak the language. But for stage one, like the real only criteria that we have right now is that you have all the documents that you need primarily.
I don't think it's actually useful to land it the way it is now. It's basically got two things which if you read them, you like, they don't go together. Doesn't make sense as a proposal anymore. The past proposal made sense on its own. The new piece maybe makes sense on its own, but together they don't make sense. So I don't see the point of pushing it to the next stage. Okay.
I guess it was more just like it doesn't exist in the repo right now. So landing it as stage one allows us to just quickly iterate on it and like then only have the 72-hour time for PRs, as opposed to like landing something as a stage seems like a big step. But I mean, either way, it doesn't make
sure. I would generally agree if it wasn't that there was such a big gap.
Can you explain the gap to me, Michael?
Well, basically, the original proposal talks about a code of conduct.
Hi, folks. I will need to drop. Bye-bye.
It talks about a code of conduct panel and a escalation procedure and how they're related and who was responsible, right? The new piece is intended to cover how we handle reports when they come in, yet it doesn't mention the code of conduct panel at all.
Okay, so there's a disconnect. They're related, but there's a disconnect.
Right, like they're both talking about how we will do the exact same thing, but it's like they use completely different terminology or they are not following the same approach.
Okay, that makes sense.
I mean, I don't think it's not necessarily a huge gap to close, but I think it's confusing when you read one or the other, because it doesn't, like, if the code of conduct panel exists, then it should be handling these requests. And if we're not gonna have it handle the requests, then we should change the other doc to say that doesn't exist, and we have something, it's describe something different. Who's going to be the one responsible, right?
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks for clarifying. Does anyone want to ping Manil or help him work through this kind of alignment with what's existing?
I guess I can touch base with him. Like, I'm happy to help move it forward. Last time he said he was going to try and do that, so I was happy to also have him just do that. But I'm also happy to jump in and help facilitate as well. So.
Yeah, or just see if see how things are going. Maybe he's got it working already. Who knows? Oh, great. Well, thanks. So we are at the top of the hour, and I think that we need to call it quits. I think most people have already called it quits, but I'll still say thanks to everyone, and we will see y'all next week. Cheers.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Thanks, y'all. Adios.